So good afternoon from Geneva, everybody. Good morning, good evening for those in other parts of the world. Welcome to the third and final session of the workshop on the establishment of a database in the framework of Article 7 of the BWC. I'm Daniel Feeks. I'm the head of the Implementation Support Unit of the Biological Weapons Convention, and thank you to all of you for joining us for this session today. Hopefully many of you were here for the previous two sessions, and you're here again to hear the final thoughts, final conclusions, and hopefully very prepared to participate actively in the discussions this afternoon as well. So thanks once again for joining us. I would also like to just share with you a couple of admin related rules and procedures before we get started, and then we can get into the substantive issues on the agenda. As I said, we want you, really would like you to participate actively this afternoon. So you have, and you can see here on the screens, the options to engage in the discussion. You can either raise your hand through the icon at the bottom of which is usually at the bottom of your screen, if you want to take the floor, or you can send a message through the chat function saying that you would like to take the floor as well. You can also type your questions and put them in writing using the chat function as well. And if you want to do that privately, it tells you how to do that here on the screen as well. As you will all no doubt be very familiar with over the last months, please continue to have your microphones muted throughout the webinar unless you want to take the floor. We are also recording the webinar for people who are unable to attend, so they will be able to watch it back later. And the presentation itself will also be made available as well. And as you may have noticed, we've switched from using WebEx to using Zoom for this webinar, and likely for other webinars and events in the future as well, just to make sure that everyone around the world can actually access the events and participate actively in them as well. So hopefully that is okay with everyone, and that this first event hosted on Zoom will go well today as well. So far, so good by the looks of things. So once again, I didn't want to take too much time. I'd much rather that we get into the substantive discussions as quickly as possible. So you can see the background already to the workshop here. Many of you did, as I've said already, attend the past two sessions, so I'm sure you're very well and familiar with these already. There's also been a background document that was provided to people as well. So without any further ado, I think I would like to pass the floor straight away to Ambassador Yan Huang, who's the permanent representative of France here in Geneva to the Conference on Disarmament, and as many of you know, was the chair of the BWC meeting of states parties back in 2019, the last time, in fact, that we had a meeting of states parties due to the pandemic, obviously. So Ambassador Huang, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon. I don't know where you are exactly. So thank you very much, UNODA, for organizing this workshop, virtual workshop. As you said, it's a series of virtual workshop, and this one is the last one. I am very pleased to deliver those opening remarks on this important proposal, which is the establishment of a database under Article 7. You know that it has been an Indian-French initiative since the very beginning, and I am happy and proud to continue this very fruitful cooperation with our Indian friends. My colleagues, Ambassador Sharma, has offered to give the closing remarks, and he will do so later on. So, as I said, this is the first and final session of a workshop on the matter. The first and second ones were very rich, and I'm sure this one will be too. I particularly thank our colleagues from the OPCW, the WHO, and the IAEA for their active participation during the first session. Hereof, I retain that the response and assistance network of the Atomic Agency facilitates the provision and coordination of international assistance during a nuclear emergency. The assistance and protection database of the OPCW provides source of information for state parties on means of protections against chemical weapons through submissions and of inquiries of capacity building assistance or offers of assistance. And last, related and comparable mechanism is WHO, where we have an emergency medical teams database, which provides a platform for the registrations and accreditations of emergency medical teams and contribute in this matter to the preparedness and prompt deployment in case of emergency. Those examples prove that databases can be particularly relevant tool to provide international assistance through multilateral fora. And we are convinced that the BTWC should have its own, adapted to the very particular field of biological threats, of course. And that database should be complementary but distinct in its objective and function with the Article 10 database of the BTWC in order to avoid any duplication in assistance and to be fully in compliance with the different aim of Article 7 on one hand and Article 10 on the other hand. This is for the first session of our workshop. The second session of our workshop allowed 3 discussions on the technical aspects of our database, and in that perspective was also very rich. I retain that the discussions highlighted regarding the purpose and function of the database, that there are 2 important time frames to distinguish. Preparedness, in order to be ready if an attack should occur, and response, when an attack actually occurs. That 2 time frames do not imply the same type of assistance. Additionally, regarding available expertise within the database, I take back the interesting idea to have a sort of institutional approach rather than an individual one in order to assure continuity and durability. Those are just some of the numerous ideas heard, and I'm very grateful to all states parties to participate in so far and shared with us their inputs. It has been very useful, and I encourage you to continue today, as there will be a Q&A sessions, as well as a live polling session, which will allow you to truly be a real architect of this database. Indeed, one of the main lessons that I draw for this stage from this workshop is that it confirms that state parties have made that proposal their own proposal. We saw it clearly during this workshop with the different expression using, for instance, future tense and not conditional one to describe how should to the database. It is very encouraging. It is also a very good reason. A reason that I think I think is well understood and shared among state parties. The fact that Article 7 is a clause of collective security of the Convention. Therefore, the proposal of a database to operationalize this clause is, of course, an Indian-French proposal, but it is mainly a proposal to the benefit of all state parties. A proposal that every state will take advantage to. We saw it clearly with the current pandemic, when we are dealing with living pathogen. No one is safe until everyone is. Therefore, we wish to continue to build this database with all state parties. This session today is another opportunity to do so, and I encourage you to seize this opportunity. This workshop constitutes a first step, an important one, but only a first. We are keen to continue to discuss our proposal in other occasions, in other formats. As the 8th review conference in 2016 agreed, and I quote, supports the establishment of a database open to all state parties to facilitate assistance under the framework of Article 7, end quote. So our goal is now to address all remaining and pending technical aspects of this proposal in order for the next review conference to provide a specific mandate for its real establishment. So I'm stopping here. Just to conclude, I request the support of all state parties for this long endeavor, but not so long now, and towards the adoption of a decision during the next review conference to set up this Article 7 database, which is a long overdue. All in all, I thank you very much for your participation so far and for your presence today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your inputs and ideas. Thank you very much. Daniel, over to you.
Many thanks, Ambassador. Thanks for your kind words, and thanks to you and your colleagues for the support in this. Also, thanks in advance, obviously, to Ambassador Sharma, from whom we'll hear at the end of the workshop, for his support, and also his colleagues as well in the conduct of these 3 workshop sessions over the last few weeks. Okay, so thank you very much for that. We will now move into the substantive part of the discussion here. I will hand over now to Fanny Tonos Paniagua, who is the project consultant who's been working with us on this project. Fanny, along with Jamie Revel from UNIDIR, are going to lead us through discussion on each of the topics with which I'm sure you're familiar by now as well. As Ambassador Huang referred to, we will be making use, now that we're using Zoom, we will be making use at some stages of the live polling function of Zoom as well. I mean, the main idea there is just to give you all a chance to participate, kind of interactively as well. It's obviously a completely informal gathering here anyway, so the results are not going to be used in any shape or form. You're not going to be held to anything, and it's all done anonymously anyway. So just a way to get some, initial feedback and feeling from people participating in this particular workshop, and also, as I said, to encourage interactive participation in the workshop as well. So you can see here the objectives of the session today: to provide an overview and an opportunity for the discussion of preliminary findings based on the technical input that was gathered during the previous 2 sessions, those on the 4th and the 12th of May. On the 4th, you will have heard the technical input provided based on lessons learned from other assistance databases of international organizations. And obviously, if you weren't able to attend, the recording of that session plus the supporting documents are also available. And then in the session on the 12th of May, there was technical input provided through the identification and discussion of specific topics that may require attention. And again, recording and documentation is available from that session for those of you that weren't able to attend. And as I said before, we'll be doing the same from this session as well. The recording and the documents will also be available fairly shortly on our website as well. So I will hand over now the floor, first of all, to Fanny, and then, as I mentioned, Jamie will also walk us through the next segments of this particular session now as well. So Fanny, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Daniel, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all of you. Before going into the discussion of the preliminary findings, just let us have a look at the agenda for today. First of all, we will go through the findings from the previous sessions of the workshop, and these findings will be presented according to the 4 thematic topics that were discussed during session 2. So we will have the preliminary findings and summaries of the technical input on the objectives and functions of the database, the types and categories of assistance resources, topics related to users and access, and database development and maintenance. During the discussion of each of these topics, we will be having live polling to receive further feedback. And as Daniel mentioned, this is for illustrative and interactive purposes only, and all responses will be anonymized. After that, we will have a Q&A session to provide the opportunity for a general discussion, and concluding with the wrap-up remarks by Ambassador Sharma. Next slide, please. So we will start now with the preliminary findings, the summary and the live polling. Just a few words, additional words on remarks on the live polling. All the questions here will be based on multiple selection choices. So you will be asked to choose some of responses that are already listed and provided during the polling. If you have any additional items that are not included in the provided list, you have the opportunity to share this with us through the chat function. So when we have the live polling questions, you will see the results will be shown on the screen, and this will be further discussed during the Q&A session, not during the live polling session itself. And we will then also, during the Q&A session, have the opportunity to discuss any additional items that you may have shared with us through the chat function. Next slide, please. So we are starting with the technical input and the feedback that was gathered on the database objectives and functions. And we have here the set of objectives and functions that have been identified and that are normally associated with databases that relate to assistance in connection with response to emergency situations. And in this feedback, or in this summary, we have focused on the benefits that have been identified as a result of the lessons learned from other international organizations, and also as a result of the feedback that we received from participants during the previous section. So we have, first of all, the awareness raising function, and the benefit for states parties here is that with such a function, an Article 7 database would provide a source of general information on preparing and responding to the use of a biological or toxic weapon. And this would help to contribute to public awareness on the subject. The resource registry function would have very important benefits, as well as it would provide a platform for the registration of assistance resources or capabilities that could be made available for assisting to preparedness and response to the use of a biological or toxic weapon. A related objective and function is the information exchange function that would allow states parties to have a source of information that is relevant, important, and necessary to prepare and respond to the use of a biological or toxic weapon. We also have the preparedness and capacity building function that would have a lot of benefits for states parties, as it would be a source of information on capacity building opportunities for officials in states parties, but also it may also provide a platform for matching requests and offers of assistance to enhance biopreparedness. And finally, we have also a key function that would be the matchmaking function. And in this sense, the benefit would be that there would be a platform to facilitate the submission and the matching of offers and requests for assistance to facilitate coordination and response. So this would be a matchmaking function to coordinate response in a post-event scenario. Next slide, please. Here are some further this is some further feedback and findings that was received during the previous sessions. And first of all, there were a lot of comments from participants indicating the advantages of having a wide range of database functions. So many of the participants considered that these different database functions would complement each other, and that it would be important to address, to the extent possible, all of the objectives and functions that were identified as being commonly associated with assistance databases. At the same time, participants expressed that while all of that is important, it is also necessary to consider in each case the cost implications of implementing each of these database functions. So database development, the incorporation of database features for all these functions would need prior consideration of cost implications in this context. And taking that into consideration, an important finding was that it may be a good approach to focus at the beginning on objectives and functions that may be operationalized in the short term and that may not necessarily have a large cost implications. Next slide, please. So we will have now our first question from the live polling. The first question relates to the objectives and functions of the assistance database, of an Article 7 database, and we would like to hear from you, or we will have to hear your views on which objectives and functions would you consider more useful for an Article 7 database. And with that, I pass over to Wenji. Wenji, over to you. Please start the polling on this question. I hope that you are able to see clearly the question on the screen. Which objectives and functions would you consider more useful for an Article 7 database? And we kindly ask you to choose 3 of the options that are listed on the screen. I will give a few moments for participants to make the choice to respond to the question. I see that we have already a lot of responses. I will still give a few more minutes, not minutes, a few moments to allow for more responses. So we have now more than 70% of participants voting. So with that, Wenji, over to you to show the results of the polling. Yeah, you can see the results on the screen where the preparedness and capacity building has a lot of responses, also resource registry, matchmaking for response, information exchange, and awareness raising. Thank you very much, Wenji. You can now close the screen for the polling. I thank you all for participating, and with this now I pass over to Jamie, who will lead us through the presentation of the findings on the next topic. Over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Fanny, and good morning, afternoon, or evening to colleagues, depending on where this finds you. I'm going to focus my remarks on topic 2. So if we could have, I believe it's slide 10, please, Wenji, if you could move on to the next one. So this topic is really quite closely interconnected to the objectives and the functions of any database that Fanny was discussing a minute ago, but it takes a slightly different focus, and we're looking at the question of the types and the categories of assistance resources. As has been discussed in previous sessions, there are a variety of types and categories of assistance that could be provided. So these range from things like information, so this could be, for example, manuals, reference materials, or procedures, to capacity building. This could be offers or programs for technical assistance or training. Moving through to things such as rosters or field teams that could be mobilized on short notice to provide assistance, or indeed financial contributions. Now, in each one of these, there's probably quite distinct benefits and perhaps some challenges as well. We've outlined some of these, but these are discussed in the first and the second session in particular, I think. But in terms of moving forward, I want to follow the process that Fanny has set out and actually move towards a polling. But before that, if I could talk through some of the feedback. So if I could have the next slide, please, Wenji. Okay. So this draws on some of the feedback that has been collected from the second session and points raised in early meetings. This is really intended to stimulate thinking and discussion around this issue. But as you can see from the slide, the point was raised that offers could emanate from states parties as well as relevant international organizations. It was pointed out that advanced registration of resources can show availability, at least in principle, to provide assistance upon request. Because there was discussion around specific offers of assistance once a request has actually been submitted, and they can be useful in sort of facilitating a matchmaking process between offers and requests. One point that was raised a couple of times in the discussion of the second session, I think, was the importance of regular renewal or update of registered resources. This was something that some felt was absolutely crucial. And there were different suggestions that were made in this regard. So I think some around the nomination of individuals on rosters and institutions and how that would be updated. Then we have discussion around the importance of institutional or agency focus for the registration of expertise. And there's a series of ideas there for further consideration. But for the purpose of today, we want to move further forward and get some feedback and insights on this. Again, we're going to use the polling system. So if I could have the next slide, please, Wenji, slide 12. So I'll ask Wenji to begin the live polling question. As has been pointed out by Fanny and Daniel, please also do feel free to submit questions to the chat function here as well. It's not intended to narrow down the discussion, so don't feel constrained by the options that you're provided, but it is nonetheless helpful to get your thoughts and to get some sense of this. And just to point out, all questions and comments and answers are anonymous here, so please don't feel as though this is trying to pick out anybody's particular views. So without further ado, I'll open up the poll now on categories of assistance resources, specifically the question of what types of assistance resources would you consider more useful for an Article 7 database. Okay, so there we go. Thank you very much, Wenji. And I'll give people a couple of 3 minutes or so to go through these questions. We'd encourage you to try and choose 3 options, please. Okay, if I could give people another minute before we move forward. Okay, I believe we've gone past the 70% mark in terms of participation in the survey. So perhaps if we can close this now, Wenji. So we're up to 75%, if I understand correctly. And if you could display the results, that would be great. Thank you. Wow. Okay. So you can see there's clear interest in particular in the area of capacity building there, with 75% of people seem supportive of that. But then expertise and then financial contributions, field teams also seeming to garner some support there in terms of this. I should also point, just to reiterate, it is only an illustrative snapshot. I know there's some comments that have emerged in the chat as well from Richard Guthrie, and we'll revisit some of those in the Q&A session afterwards. Okay. But with that, perhaps I shall hand back over to you, Fanny, to take the next topic. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jamie. We will moving forward with our topics and the preliminary findings. And now we will summarize the feedback that was received on the important topic of users and access. And again, focusing on the perceived benefits by participants in connection with this topic. So we have the 2 main categories of users designated by states parties and users designated by international organizations. The benefits for states parties, of course, is that by designating users for an Article 7 database, states parties would be able to grant access to all government actors that may be engaged in preparedness and response to the use of a biological weapon. And it is also perceived that when all actors have access to a centralized database, this is also a way to promote a national coordination among institutional stakeholders at the national level. There are users designated by international organizations, and in this case, the main benefit is that this would allow to avoid duplications with existing mechanisms, and it will also support and facilitate coordination with those mechanisms, again with a strong focus on avoiding duplications with regimes that already exist or databases that already exist in the context of other multilateral frameworks. Next slide, please. Some additional feedback on the topic of users and access. The discussions show that it may be good to focus initially on officially designated users from state parties and international organizations. Feedback also showed, or the experience from other international organizations shows that it is important to outsource data entry to users so that the administrator, so in this case the ISU, that would facilitate the role of the administrator of the database when the data entry is outsourced to users in states, parties, and international organizations. A point was made of the importance of identifying the right users in states parties, as in some cases there may be disconnect among the relevant national agencies or different ministries. So it was considered important to identify mechanisms to make sure that the right users have access to the database. Another important point that was raised in this regards relates to the availability of the information. So basically, if there would be publicly available information in the database, this decision, of course, which information made publicly available in the context of the Article 7 database. Next slide, please. We come now to our next question for the live polling. And the question relates to the many users or beneficiaries of an Article 7 database at the national level. So what would be your view of who would be those many users or beneficiaries at the national level? And with this, over to you, Wenji, to start the polling. I hope you are able to see clearly the question on the screen. And we would kindly ask you to choose 3 options of those categories of officials or persons who would be the main users or beneficiaries of an Article 7 database. We give you a couple of moments to do that, and please remember that if there is any category that you find is not included in this list, you are welcome to provide that comment via the chat function. I see that responses are coming very fast. We still give a couple of moments. Very good. Very good. I think we have a lot of responses. So if you can, Wenji, show the results. Thank you, Wenji. As you can see on the screen, the main users, the views are that the main users would be officials from emergency response agencies, but others would also be important, like officials from health authorities, national security authorities, ministries of foreign affairs, and also personnel from national laboratories. Thank you very much for your participation, Wenji. Please, you can close the results. And with that, then I pass over to Jamie for the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. Wenji, if I could have the next slide, please. So we're now going to turn to topic 4, and there are 2 parts to this. The first part looks at database development and maintenance, and then the second part looks at resource implications. So in terms of the first part, some of the preliminary findings and feedback on database development and maintenance are visible in the slides. So as you can see, there's some discussion around consideration of a modular or phased approach for the development of a database, which would take into account feedback from states, parties and users. I think this was drawn out in the discussion at the second session, but also I think it's perhaps reflected in the experiences of other international organizations with these sort of database systems. And it does become a sort of modular or phased approach where it's sort of built on depending on end user feedback. Another point which I think is important as well, to highlight here as well, is avoiding duplication of assistance of other efforts, making sure that there's consistency across these. And so had some discussion around enhancing the visibility of database benefits and regular users as well here. Okay. Something which was emphasized a couple of times, and I'll come to that shortly, but towards the end of this, but was this idea of having a user-friendly interface that incorporates intuitive and interactive and attractive sort of functionalities. And I think we have some further information on this shortly. There's a discussion around making use of existing software suites, so trying to make this compatible and fit in with things such as the eCBM platform and the Article 10 database. And then the suggestions in the discussion as well to consider a consolidated approach for all BWC related tools to prevent these duplications and have a single website, single secure website for these tools as well. There was also some additional suggestions as well at points around the idea of having some sort of data collection exercise to determine what might be available as well. It might be also something that's useful to consider. But it does lead to the question, and if I could have the next slide, please, Wenji. Which features do you think could be the prioritized ones during an initial phase of the database development? And this will be the subject of our next poll. As with past polls, we really welcome your thoughts on this topic, so please feel free to sort of to answer the questions, but also we welcome comments, and I can see there are comments and points being raised in the Q&A already, but would encourage you to keep talking about those, and we can raise them in the question and answer question and answer session after the final polling. So with that in mind, please, Wenji, if I could ask you to open the poll, please. So which features do you think should be prioritized? Should it be the data collection process, preparedness and capacity building, needs assessment and guidance tools for facilitating requests and offers of assistance, or should this be a matchmaking requests and offers of assistance, or should it be something else? If it's something else, please do let us know. We don't want to narrow down the discussion. We're really keen to get your views. I think if we have another 22 minutes or so to fill this in. Okay, if I can give people another minute to add your thoughts. We have another couple of seconds then, Wenji, if I could ask you to reveal the results of this poll. So if we close that now, Wenji, could I ask? There we go. Thank you very much. Okay. So in terms of priority features, we can see that data collection, it's the registration of users and resources, appears to garner the most support in this particular exercise with 69%. Preparedness and capacity building at 48%. Then we can see needs assessment and guidance tools at 56%. And then 37% for matchmaking requests and offers of assistance. Okay. Right, we'll come back to some of the slides in the discussion shortly, but before we do that in the Q&A session, if I could move to slide 17, please, Wenji. The next one, yeah. So this is the second part of this topic, which deals with resource implications. And some of the preliminary findings and the feedback that we've had so far, we've kind of tried to capture and summarize here. But the two key points are that in terms of responsibilities linked to managing access, authenticating data, and supporting submissions by users, it seems the ISU would have a sort of central role as an administrator of any Article 7 database. And the second point is that the development of a database and user interface tool would require periodic upgrades, and it would require dedicated IT support, and this was something which was discussed at the second session as well. And in turn, there's funding implications for this, particularly as the ISU does not have an IT developer expertise. We don't have a poll on this issue formally, but we do recognize that it's an important issue area, and this drew out some quite strong views in the second session. I would encourage you to hold off on some of those until we get to the Q&A, which will be initiated shortly. And with that, I'll hand over to Fanny at least to talk through some of the visualizations of possible database functions. And this is really intended to stimulate further discussion. And then this will be followed by a Q&A in which I'd encourage you all to participate, share your views and suggestions. So over to you, Fanny.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jamie. We wanted to use this opportunity to provide a diagram where participants can visualize the Article 7 database, basically what a portal for such a database would look like. So how the objectives and functions that have been discussed, how in practice these functions could look like. in an implementation phase. As you can see on the screen, so the diagram is a conceptual diagram, not an IT-driven diagram. So you see here that let's say the main components or elements of such a portal could be a knowledge hub where the relevant information is, and a module or a portal on contact points where all the users from states parties and international organizations would be listed. Then there would be a module on assistance resources where the different categories of assistance resources would be listed. And finally, there would be a module on events. So this feature, or rather a feature, this would be 4 features that would enable an Article 7 database to reflect the different objectives and functions that have been discussed. So the module on events would allow to reflect the activities, so basically the matchmaking. So an assistant event on preparedness would be, for instance, an activity where there has been a request of assistance on matters related to capacity building or preparedness, and there has been offers of assistance, and there has been a matchmaking. So this feature of events would enable to visualize when there has been a matchmaking of offers and requests of assistance, whether for preparedness or for response. There is also the possibility to reflect training events or simulation exercises through an Article 7 database portal. So this diagram would reflect how such a portal would look like, because the database itself, understood in, let's say, in a narrow sense, is of course all the relevant information. But to make this information available to the users, a content management system has to be put in place that could, for instance, look like this diagram, could look like this sample portal that is reflected on this slide. We'll look forward to your views and comments on this diagram. As mentioned, we just wanted to take the opportunity to provide you an idea, so to help participants visualize how such a portal could look like. Next slide, please. With this slide, we conclude this segment of the session on the preliminary findings, and this slide summarizes the possible issues for further consideration. So this is really for illustrative purposes only. And this is just a summary of maybe some of the main points that were raised by participants during the previous sessions. So this includes, first of all, the illustrative guidance on types and categories of assistance resources, particularly as this would help to facilitate matchmaking of offers and requests of assistance. Then also the relation and harmonization with the Article 10 database. It is also important to have clarity on the categories and rights of users, which can have different rights and roles. then the information that may be publicly available, the procedures for requests and offers of assistance under Article 7 would necessarily be closely linked to the matchmaking function of an Article 7 database. So of course, this is one of the aspects that is that one of the issues that requires further consideration in the context of relevant discussions among states parties. And another issue is the cost estimates for development of the IT tool itself. As it was mentioned before, James mentioned before, there is a need of dedicated IT expertise to develop such a tool. And of course, it would be important to have a cost estimate in this regard. Thank you. With this, we conclude the segment on the preliminary findings, and I thank you for your attention, and then I pass the floor back to Daniel. Over to you, Daniel. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Fanny, and thanks to both you and to Jamie as well, and thanks also to all of the people participating in the surveys there as well. Thanks very much for that. Again, I think it was good to get a sense, as we mentioned, an indicative, illustrative sense of you know, areas to look into people's feelings in terms of areas of assistance or types of assistance and things as well. So very useful. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we have time. We have about, I think, 30 minutes or so for about 25 minutes for discussion, for questions and answers as well. I can see, as Jamie and Fanny were encouraging you, that some people have already put some things down in the chat as well. And as we said very clearly, we'd be interested in hearing from you in terms of other areas which you think may not have been included in those multiple choice lists that we provided in the live polls as well. So please feel free to say that. So as I said, please, you can either raise your hand to take the floor, you can put in the chat that you would like to take the floor. We've in fact had questions from two of the Richards in the audience, in fact, Richard Guthrie and Richard Kuppit. So perhaps just for the sake of breaking the ice and seeing people's faces, maybe Richard Guthrie, you were asked the first question. So Richard, did you want to ask your question orally? The floor is yours if you would like to. Yep.
Thank you. Yes, I can refer to it already. Sorry, I had my second dose of my vaccine yesterday, and I feel still slightly dazed.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, it was the contrast between the comments by Ambassador Huang in the beginning about the two timescales, the sort of preparedness effort and then the sort of immediate response activity, which I think is very important for this database. And I thought that the sort of question you had for the types of assistance resources, there are some that are much more appropriate to one or other of those timescales. So, for example, I haven't got it in front of me now the questions, but I think field teams was one, where I could see a field team as an emergency response, but not necessarily as a capacity building exercise. And I was just wondering whether, you know, some nuancing on the questions, or maybe just simply having a separate question for the different timescales for the types of resource activity might have brought some more clarity.
Okay, great. Thanks, Richard. Okay, well, let's gather a couple of questions and then we can put those to, well, maybe to Jamie or Fanny if they feel able or willing to respond. Otherwise, I mean, there are open questions for discussion as well. Maybe others will have views on those too. I saw, as I mentioned before, Rick Kuppit, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Fanny and James, for the presentation. So I had several questions. I think first one is how you might handle non-government organizations in terms of this assistance activity, in part because, as we know, and I know Fanny's familiar with the Assistance Support Initiative that we have, quite a few non-government organizations are involved, or at least non-central government organizations are involved, such as universities, individual hospitals, all sorts of in implementation of assistance. So, you know, who or how could they have access, or how would that be handled? The second one was Fanny's visualization slide. I just wondered if there was an estimate of total costs related to, if you had all those elements, all those components, what would be the cost? And if you, just in case you don't, what would be the breakdown of those costs? And then finally, I had a question about how many and to what extent does each component in the slide overlap with existing databases, such as I noted capacity building was one of the issues or types of things you would look for gathering data on that. I certainly think duplication sometimes has real advantages. As a social scientist or a scientist in general, duplicating is sometimes really good. So, but just do you have an estimate of the overlap for individual components? That is, some components may overlap other databases much more than others. And I just wondered if you had anything in particular. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rick. Okay, and I see we have a question from Dana Komarek now. So perhaps if we take Dana's question and then we go back to Jamie and Fanny as well. Dana, over to you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. First, let me thank UNODA, France and India for organizing this workshop. We think it's very useful to move forward. Switzerland appreciate the proposal on the table concerning the database and all the work that have been done so far. And now to the question, in our opinion, it would be useful if this initiative would be mutually reinforcing with the other Article 7 initiative on guidelines that is being developed by South Africa and the United States. And maybe there are some ways to enhance this even more. Maybe there are some interfaces that could be developed, or there are parts of the guidelines to be identified which could be reflected in the database. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, so there's three, well, more than three questions from three commentators at least anyway. So maybe, I don't know, Fanny first, did you have any responses to any of those questions or issues raised?
Thank you very much, Daniel. Well, some of these questions will, let's say it's work in progress. When we look, for instance, at the breakdown of the costs, this is, to my knowledge, there is not an overall estimate of the costs of the development of the tool and the development of the interface. This will depend on the features, of course, that will be chosen for an initial development phase. And the breakdown of the cost will be over time and will depend on the features to be implemented, the timelines, and also the tool that will be used, because it is still to be determined what will be since the IT, I'm not an IT person, but of course the format and the modality chosen will also influence the cost. So this is something that will still need to be considered. Indeed, it is of course correct that the development of each feature will have different cost implications, and in my view, it may be still difficult to see the overall costs of all the features to be implemented, as they will be implemented preferably in a gradual or phased manner. So right now, that's all I can comment on the costs. Perhaps if we have some colleagues from international organizations that have already developed such databases, maybe they can help us further with that and provide some input. Regarding the overlap of some of the features of that were shown on the diagram, let me just have a look. Let me see. Well, I don't see it here. Maybe you can, Wenji, show the slide again on the diagram. Yes, on the overlap with assistance databases, again, this may be something that needs further consideration. A very obvious one here is the preparedness and capacity building and the overlap with the Article 10 database in connection with assistance databases of other international organizations. I am not sure if that is also what the question or the comment was relating to, overlaps. And there, when we look at events and we see assistance events and response, we know that there are other databases that or platforms or frameworks from international organizations that provide also a platform for responding to emergency situations in general that may be also relevant in this context. And the idea or the purpose is to ensure that that there is a harmonization in a way, so that there is a clarity of what would be the preferred mechanism, or the, let's say, the preferred tools or platform in this context. So this in connection with the possible overlaps. There was also something on the field teams and a comment that these are particularly relevant for response and not so much for preparedness and capacity building. Indeed, that is of course correct, but it is still important to have a focus on the registration of that resource, even if the let's say the response feature would not be implemented in an initial stage. It is still important to collect information and have information on the resources that are available in the event of response. So I would see the field teams, even on the registration of resources like field teams, would also be an important aspect for an initial phase of database. There was a question on the types of assistance resources and the gradual approach. And I think that's also a very valid comment on how each of these types of assistance resources would need to be implemented depending on the phase of development, or on the feature that is being developed, and it's something that will need to be considered. In connection with the question about NGOs, this is something to be considered among state parties, and there maybe we can also ask colleagues from other international organizations to share their views on how this may be addressed in their respective platforms. And these are my comments for now. Daniel, I may have missed some points, but that's all for now from my side, and then back to you, Daniel. Thank you.
No, I don't think you missed anything, Fanny. Great, thank you very much. I see that Richard Guthrie's raised his hand. Richard, did you want to come back on specifically on that same question again?
Yes, just briefly. I mean, I think one of the difficulties in persuading some of the people who will be key in taking decisions on this in the 8th Review Conference is about the fact there are these two aspects to the Article 7 database. And I think I was trying to track back to the phrasing of the question. It was sort of what types of resources would be prioritized or more important or first. And I think because you were asking about resources that fell in both categories for both timelines, it's actually quite difficult to choose between them. Very difficult to prioritize across the whole spectrum, whereas if the question had been asked for, say, the preparedness side and then a separate question for the response side, it might be easier to prioritize what sort of aspects were needed within those. I think perhaps my initial question wasn't as clear as or initial comment wasn't as clear as it could have been. So thank you for letting me take the floor again.
Great, thanks, Richard. Thanks for clarifying. Jamie, did you want to respond to any of those questions, comments as well?
I mean, I think Fanny has covered a number of points I was going to make. I mean, I think there's a series of good questions, and they're quite useful for stimulating further thinking. I mean, the point on that Richard Cupit, I think you raised the point of the role of NGOs. Again, good question. There's clearly going to be a potential for NGOs to support and feed into this, but I think this is really more of a question for states parties to consider. And I think it's perhaps another example of one of those areas where there's perhaps a need for interstate, but also potentially intrastate reflection on what they actually want this database to do, and making sure that all the different bits are connected up. Because I suspect, as with many things, if you change one aspect or you pursue one particular line of a database, then that may have implications for other aspects of it. So trying to make sure it all makes sense as a complete package, and that your functions and your objectives and your actors are all aligned. But I'll leave it there. But I think it's great questions, but many of which are for the states to answer, not me.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And yeah, like you said, many of these questions will be, discussed further over the coming months and up until the 9th review conference itself taking place, hopefully next August as well. I don't see any other. Let me just have a double check. I don't see any raised hands in Zoom. I don't see any other requests in the chat either. But let me give colleagues chance to either raise their hand or to write down that they would like to take the floor before I close and we move on to the final session before we actually close the workshop. We do have time. We are slightly ahead of time at the moment, which is always good, but I don't want to cut any questions or discussions short. Great, thank you, Chen. Chen from China, over to you. You've got the floor.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks to having this important event, and I see many famous and also old, our old friends from the name list, and we're happy to have this format to have more interaction. And we already got our French colleague and Indian colleague to promote this old proposal. We think it's very important, and as Ambassador Huang mentioned, it's long overdue. Actually, we're almost there 5 years ago in Israel conference. So we support this idea, and we would like to see how we could go, what we could get in the upcoming Israel conference, which is sure will be a very historical event in the next year. Our question will be just about something happened here in Geneva, because this week, in WHO, we have a resolution about to have a convention on the pandemic preparedness and response. So the WHO would have a special session World Health Assembly this November. So it's before the National Conference. So what happened there will definitely influence something here. So we would like to we don't have any opinion on the interrelationship or intertwined relationship between the two very important bodies, the WHO and also PwC. But we would like to know how would you plan if we have a pandemic treaty or pandemic convention negotiation in Geneva, and also we have a database. We think it's very important, but how about when we have in the WHO, we have a similar database? What should we do in the next year? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chen. Yeah, a very good question. I guess a lot is still, not clear at the moment. Like you said, the special session of the WHO is scheduled, I think, for November. So yeah, and then I guess we have our MSP happening also in November. Then we have the preparatory committees, and then the review conference itself next year. So I guess those discussions will continue in those, in those frameworks and in the interfaces between them as well. But as you said, if there are databases in both, there is also I think a need for dialogue between both as well. And as we often do, I mean, the WHO is a frequent and an extremely long-standing participant and observer organization in BWC meetings. So I'm sure that will continue as well. I don't know if Jamie or Fanny wanted to say anything particularly on this issue. Jen, I don't think your question was necessarily directed to any either Fanny or Jamie. I mean, maybe others in the audience also have something to say on this issue as well. But I think, Jamie, did you want to add something?
It wasn't really an answer, just an observation to Mr. Wade's question. Not all biological weapons are necessarily WMD, so there's perhaps space in areas which fall short of a official pandemic, where there could still be value to having these sorts of assistance databases as well, irrespective of what happens with pandemic treaties. So it's just an observation there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Fanny, did you have anything to say on this particular issue?
Sorry about that. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that very valid point. I don't have any particular comment or view on that, but it just raises, I think, again, the point of how important it is in this field to ensure that there is interagency coordination also at the international level, and the importance of specific tools to do that. So if there is an Article 7 database, the experience from other international database shows that there are mechanisms, features, and functionalities from the IT perspective that can help to achieve this coordination on a practical level. And we have examples on the IEA RANET and the communication system. There are also examples in the virtual OSOC where there is interlinkage, for instance, with the field teams from the World Health Organization. So this is a very valid point, raises this importance, and that when developing an Article 7 database, looking at these specific features and functionalities will be also a key aspect. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fanny, and thanks again, Jamie, as well. I mean, as Fanny just reminded, we had presentations in earlier sessions of the workshop from OPCW, from IAEA, and also from WHO as well. I don't think, I'm just scanning through the list of participants, I don't think anyone from WHO is on in this meeting today, but if they are, then they're obviously welcome to take the floor and respond on this particular issue if they wanted to as well. But thanks again, thanks for the question. I think it's one of those issues that will continue, and again, like you mentioned, will be an ongoing issue in the run up to the review conference in particular next year as well. I don't now see any more raised hands. I don't think I can see any requests for the floor in the chat. We are now approaching the time that we should be closing up the workshop anyway. So right, yeah, so I don't see anything else. I think now in that case is time for me to hand the floor for some final words to Ambassador Pankaj Sharma, the permanent representative of India to the Conference on Disarmament. Ambassador Sharma, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ambassador Wang, Excellencies, Mr. Daniel Feeks, Dr. James Revel, Ms. Fanny Jonas, Dr. Sylvain G, Dr. Basu, Dr. Selvam, our experts from France and India, and distinguished colleagues. Let me start by thanking all of you for your valuable participation in our workshops. A special word of appreciation for Mr. Alex Lampalzer, who has ably put these workshops together. We have had 3 very productive and insightful sessions so far, with excellent participation of states parties, as well as national experts and experts from the IAEA, the OPCW, and the WHO. It is amply clear from the discussions that there is considerable interest in setting up an Article 7 database. The workshops have helped us get a better understanding of user requirements and expectations, which are the key elements in any user-driven project. We now have a roadmap, and all that is required is to give shape to the database. One thing which reminds me is of our own comments, which we had during the initial workshop, where we had said that we will try to avoid duplication and redundancies with other databases. And this was pointed out by Mr. Wei, our distinguished colleague from China. And I believe that our Article 7 database would definitely have an interface with some of these databases from the IAEA, OPCW, WHO, and so as to avoid redundancies in that sense. The current pandemic has further underlined the importance and need for such a database as a critical tool for preparedness and response. While the Article 7 database will serve all member states, we believe that it will be all the more useful for fellow developing countries. We hope that it will not be a victim of politicization and a package approach as referred to sometimes, as it is for the greater good of the humanity. And Daniel, you'll remember, I'm reminded of the noble initiative by the Islamic Republic of Iran in 2011, when both of us were there in the OPCW, when Iran successfully spearheaded setting up the International Support Network for Victims of Chemical Weapons and a voluntary trust fund at the OPCW. It showed that we can rise above our narrow political differences for a good cause. And we hope that we'll do the same with the Article 7 database. As for the France-India joint proposal, we have an exciting way forward with a calendar of activities and the run-up to the PrepCons and the review conference. Let me briefly share how we envision it. We propose to share findings based on feedback and discussions from the webinar series and the expert session at the upcoming meeting of the experts, MX4, in September 2021. We will then prepare an updated and revised working paper consolidating feedback received during the MX4, which will be tabled at the annual meeting of states parties. And we also plan to host side events in the margins of upcoming BWC meetings. We'll look forward to engaging with states parties with a view to adopting a decision at the 9th review conference to establish the much needed Article 7 database, as well as setting up an Article 7 trust fund. A corollary of these decisions will be the need to strengthen the BWC ISU, both in terms of financial and human resources, through an appropriate decision. The delegations from France and India remain at your disposal in this endeavor. Our sincere gratitude to the team BWC ISU for all the assistance and cooperation for the workshops. As you can appreciate, that this endeavor would not have been possible without the leadership and guidance of Ambassador Wang. He deserves a round of big applause, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you, Daniel.
Many thanks, Ambassador Sharma, and many thanks once again to both you and to Ambassador Huang for your and your colleagues' support in organizing these workshops as well. And from my side, I'd also, as you did, thank Alex on my team here, Fanny and Jamie, obviously, as well. And then also our backroom staff who have run this Zoom meeting today and the previous WebEx ones as well, Wenji, Rishab, Mohammed, and Lara as well. Thank you to all of you for your help in the background there as well. It wouldn't be possible to do this without all of you doing that too. So I would now, again, thank you all as well for participating. Thanks for everyone for answering the questions, taking part in the survey. A good discussion again, and you heard from Ambassador Sharma there, the way forward, the way in which France and India are planning to take things forward as well. And we obviously look forward to future discussions and hopefully to actually be seeing everyone in person again in the not too distant future, hopefully for the meetings of experts here in Geneva in late August, early September of this year, and then subsequent meetings as well. So thank you once all again. Thanks for taking the time to participate today, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks again. Bye-bye, everybody.